This video will be a little bit different than my previous videos. Today I'm going to be showing my process for converting this perfect bound text block into a rounded spine on sawn-in cords. This is a technique I developed when I didn't want to use a perfect bound text block for a rebind and I wanted something a little bit more solid. I found that this is a good way of making the text block nice and solid and also getting that rounded spine aesthetic if that is what you're after. So I ripped off my cover and then I'm left with this text block, which is just glued together at the spine. So I want to get that glue off. I use my guillotine for this. I used to do it by hand, which took a really long time, but also worked just fine. The cuts don't have to be perfect. The main thing to remember is that you cut off as little as possible while still getting all of the glue. You don't want to cut too deep into that inner margin, or else once the book is bound back together, you start having the words creep too far into the gutter of the book and it makes it a little bit more difficult to read. So then I'm left with my stack of pages. I've drawn this diagonal line just to make sure that I keep the text in the right order in case it gets out of order during this process. And then I've learned with trial and error how many cords I want to do when I do this technique, and I settled on 5. Doing 3 just doesn't feel like it makes a solid enough book, and 6 is too many, and I will never do an even number. I'm an odd number person, so I settled on 5, which is a good number for this in the end. So I've drawn out the lines evenly spaced of where I'm going to put the cords, and then I'm going to saw a groove for each of the cords. This saw is probably not the right tool for the job, but it is what I have at home. It is the perfect size for the cords that I use, which are about 3 millimeters thick. So I'm going to keep using it. It works perfectly fine. Just don't cut yourself when you're doing this. I saw just deep enough so that the cord can sit neatly into the groove and it's not sticking out and it's not recessed into the groove either. I just saw it so that it's nice and flush with the spine. I do have a piece of chipboard on either side of my text block when I'm doing this as well. It helps so that I don't have to saw into my book press when I'm doing this. Instead, I saw into the chipboard. And I use those pieces of chipboard later on. They just go into my scrap pile and I always find uses for them. So I'm just making sure that my cord is going to fit nicely, making sure that my grooves are even. It helps to cut from either side for this because I find it ends up a little bit slanted if I just do it from one side the entire time. Once that is done, I am here again with my stack of papers and it's time to make the rounding on the spine. So in order to do this, I just used a bottle to help create that curve, and then I'm holding my pages in place. Once I have a curve, how much I would like it to be, then I'm going to put all of this back into my press, trying to hold it all together properly while I'm doing it, which is kind of the hardest part. You can always trim the head and tail once the book is completed if you want it to be nice and flat at the end. This one ended up working out pretty well and I didn't even need to trim it. But you do occasionally end up with pages out of place that you might need to trim or sand to get those perfect. So now I've cut 5 lengths of cord. I always have a little bit of extra on the ends just so that I can cut it down later and I'm not too short. And then I pull my text block so it is halfway sticking out of my press, and then it is time to do kind of a double fan technique for the gluing. Because the spine is rounded, it's harder than a regular double fan where there is a flat back, but it still works well. It just is a bit of a messy process. So you see my hands kind of get covered in glue. PVA glue dries pretty fast, so I am working pretty quickly here. I folded it over the one way and then the other way to help get glue on either side of all of the pages. And also going up and down the spine instead of just sideways on the spine helps to get glue in between all of those cracks as well. I'm pretty generous with my glue. I wipe off excess later if there is some, and any of it squeezes out the sides, but I want to make sure that I am getting glue in all the pages. Using my cords to kind of cinch the spine together as the glue starts to dry helps to make sure that everything is in place and that glue isn't running down between the pages of the book as well. Another thing I've learned with trial and error doing this method is to make sure you're cleaning up the sides where glue is going to squeeze out as you cinch everything together on the spine. If you end up with glue drying on the sides of the pages, then it just makes it really hard to case in later. You don't want where the cords are sticking out to be like encased in glue, because then it's really hard to fray those cords out later, and it's hard to get them to lay flat underneath your end papers and in your case without being lumpy and being able to see them in the finished product. So that's why I'm always wiping the edges with paper towel to make sure that there isn't excess glue building up at those spots. Another layer of glue, once I have my cords in place, I have sunk this back deeper down into my book press again so that it's just the curve of the spine sticking out, so that there's pressure on where the glue is. And the cords also help to hold that pressure, especially where the rounded part is not within the press. And then I am going to line the spine here with some tissue paper. It's not really structural. I'm still going to add mull later on, but the tissue paper helps to kind of support as it dries. It helps to support the cords in their grooves, and I now use my bone folder to really push that glue in, making sure that it is seated well in all the grooves, not air bubbles and stuff, and that my cords are all the way around to the front of the book. I am going to rip off that little strip of tissue paper that's left as well. When it's drying, I am putting it between pieces of chipboard again with just some parchment paper as a barrier so that it doesn't glue itself to my chipboard while it dries. Keep the cords out. Again, you want to make sure that they're still flexible at the edge and then they're not being glued flat to your book at this point. I haven't added end papers yet. I do that afterwards. So you want to make sure that the cords are sticking out enough that you're still able to tip on the end papers. And then I'm putting all of this back into my press to dry for a little while. Constantly checking to make sure that everything is still flat. This is kind of my last setting stage, so you want to make sure things are as flat as possible at this point because the glue is going to dry. And then you're not going to be able to make any more adjustments anymore. One final layer of glue on top of all of this, and then I will let it dry. What I didn't show in this video is adding mull and craft paper to the spine. So I did use mull and then lined the spine with craft paper at the end as well. And that is what gives the final sturdiness and helps support the text block when you case it in. One final cleanup of any extra glue, and then I would let this dry. And so that's basically the process that I've been using to create these text blocks. This is the final product. I didn't show myself making the case or casing it in, but this is how the book functions in the end. As you can see, it opens really well. It lays flat. It stays open. I read this book with no problems. I also, did some experiments with it, like bending it backwards, which you're not really supposed to do with books, but people do it. Making sure that nothing was feeling loose or that it doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart, and it really doesn't. It feels really solid. I also do always sew my own end bands. It's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people don't, but I think it adds a little bit extra support as well when you're doing a technique like this. It can't hurt. So I feel like I have finally got this technique down to one that I am happy with. I hope that this video was helpful. If you have any ideas of how to make this technique even better, or if you found this video helpful, please let me know.